In the year 1521, the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, situated in the heart of Mexico, was razed to the ground by Spanish conquerors. Its destruction brought an end to a century of Aztec rule in Mexico and marked a turning point for European dominance of South America. But who were the Aztecs, and why did their wealthy and prosperous empire fall so quickly to the Spanish conquerors? Find out in today's episode of the History Chronicles. By the early 1500s, the Spanish Empire had made significant inroads into the so-called New World of the Americas. Columbus's expedition of 1492, setting out to find a faster route to India, had instead set a trend for an explosion of settlement and conquest across the Atlantic Ocean. Columbus's own crew had arrived in Cuba, then Haiti, named Hispaniola by the Spanish sailors. 3 more expeditions ensued, which saw further settlement of these islands and the scouting for more. Trinidad and the mainland of South America were found on the 3rd voyage, and the coast of Honduras on the 4th. By 1496, Spanish colonists had established a city on Hispaniola, naming it Santo Domingo. From here, over 30 tons of gold were packed off to Spain by the year 1520. The conquest of the Americas was proving lucrative for the Spanish, to say the least. These initial conquests, however, set a bloody precedent for what was to come. In their conquest, the Spanish parcelled their land into repartimentos, fragments of countryside which could be farmed by the locals in return for Spanish protection. On the island of Hispaniola, these were known by the name of encomiendas. Here, the brutal system which effectively employed the locals as slave labour led to the deaths of over 3 million local Taino, the people native to the island. The population was effectively wiped out due to the lack of immunity to European diseases. To replace the diminishing Taino and their farms, the Spanish conquerors then shipped across 40,000 natives of the Bahamas for a life of hard labour and slavery under Spanish control. With dying slaves and failing crops, however, the Spanish soon realised that only so much money lay in agriculture. The real wealth of the Indies, as they were now called, lay in their access point to the gold of South America. In 1519, the Spanish governor of Cuba, Diego de Velázquez, wrote a letter to King Charles V of Spain. In the letter, he asked the king's permission for an expedition to be sent further into the American mainland. Here, it was rumoured, there resided an advanced civilization that had riches far beyond any other yet encountered on this new continent. Appointed to lead this expedition was Hernan Cortez. Cortez was aged 33 and the son of a noble family who had emigrated to Cuba from Spain. However, he was what was known as a hidalgo, a noble without an hereditary title. As such, he had to carve out his own position and wealth, rather than have it passed down to him. He did not wait for the king's reply to the governor's letter. Only days after his appointment, he set off. He was headed for the empire of the Aztecs. The Valley of Mexico had been inhabited by a series of advanced civilizations from around the year 500 AD. Of these, the word Aztec refers to a group of 8 tribes who spoke the same language, the language called Nahuatl. Some of these tribes were nomadic, travelling around the area surrounding the valley for food and water. Others settled in the valley itself, eventually establishing themselves on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. These tribes were frequently at war, but at the beginning of the 15th century, an alliance between 3 of them saw the valley settled and conquered. These were the Aztecs, who, when Hernan Cortez set off from Cuba, numbered upwards of 1.5 million people. Their capital was the city of Tenochtitlan, a sprawling metropolis by 15th century standards with a population of around 200,000. This outsized any rival in continental Europe. The city was situated on the lake and, thus surrounded by water, was likened to Venice when the Spanish encountered it. From Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Emperor ruled a number of people estimated to be in the range of 5 million. They extracted taxes from the rivals that they had subdued by military force and exerted soft power by limiting their communication and trade between their neighbours. It was these neighbours, however, that the Spanish were to exploit as they made their way inland from the Atlantic shore. Cortez had gathered an army of 600 men that followed the route of an earlier expedition into the Aztec Empire. En route, the Spanish secured alliances with smaller Aztec city-states and the towns of their rivals, the Tlaxcaltecs and the Texcocans. To communicate, the Spanish depended on the services of a local woman who spoke both Spanish and the local language of Nahuatl, called Donna Marina. Donna Marina had in fact been gifted to Hernan Cortez's ragtag band by an Aztec chieftain. Cortez's journey also led him to free the Franciscan friar, one Jerónimo de Aguilar, from captivity by the Mayan civilization. Both Donna Marina and Jerónimo de Aguilar were to prove invaluable in negotiations with the indigenous groups that the Spanish encountered as they ventured further inland. In November 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernan Cortez met with the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma in the city of Tenochtitlan. On reporting the meeting back to his king, Cortez appears overwhelmed at the grandeur of the city in which he found himself. "There is one square twice as large as that of the city of Salamanca, surrounded by porticos, where are daily assembled more than 60,000 souls. Here we found all kinds of merchandise that the world affords, embracing the necessaries of life, painters' colours as numerous as can be found in Spain, and as fine shades, deerskins dressed and undressed, dyed different colours, earthenware of a large size and excellent quality, large and small jugs, jars, pots, bricks, and an endless variety of vessels, all made of fine clay." The Aztec Emperor Moctezuma greeted Cortez along with his Aztec nobility. One Mexican source writes that they walked hand in hand through the city and gave the visiting Spaniards time to view them closely. Some Aztec sources have suggested that the emperor thought the visiting conquistador to be the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. However, what seems more likely is that the emperor viewed the Spanish with an air of pragmatism, as people who could be bought off with splendid gifts or even isolated in the capital of Tenochtitlan and destroyed. After some days in the capital, it appears Cortez was the one to become paranoid. Here he was, his small force of men easily outnumbered in the huge Aztec city. What made things worse was that Cortez needed gold to pay off his investors. Also, he would soon be sought after with an arrest warrant by the Spanish governor of Cuba for insubordination in setting off too early. Cortez acted quickly and seized the initiative. His men placed the Emperor Moctezuma under house arrest in his own city. Cortez attempted to rule through the detained ruler, but tensions were soon raised further when word of a Spanish force out for his arrest reached Cortez from Cuba. The Cuban governor Belacque was after him. Cortez now left Tenochtitlan, leaving his lieutenant in charge, Pedro de Alvarado. He moved fast to defeat the force sent after him by the Spanish, and even convinced most of those who had surrendered to travel to Tenochtitlan and bolster his forces there. While Cortez was gone, Alvarado had hardly stabilised the situation between the Spanish and the Aztecs. He had massacred a large number of the Aztec nobility during a feast in the city. Unrest among the people of Tenochtitlan was growing as a result. They now demanded that the Spanish leave the city and began to lay siege to the foreign visitors in the emperor's palace. Cortez now returned to a city at war. In one confrontation, the Emperor Moctezuma himself was killed as he seemingly tried to calm his people. Without the emperor as captive, Cortez and his band now had no legitimacy to rule. They fled the city in June 1520, suffering heavy losses as they did so. Now, however, the Spanish regrouped in the nearby town of Tlaxcala, where they would organise a much more decisive assault on the Aztec capital. Cortez's forces grew as Spanish soldiers in the Caribbean islands and local South Americans, resentful of Aztec rule, flocked to join him. He organised for ships to be built on the coast, dismantled and brought across land, where they could be put afloat on Lake Texcoco and could blockade Tenochtitlan. The first siege of the city took place in April 1521. The European advantage of gunpowder was brought to bear as fighting shifted to the familiar European model of siege warfare. What took the most devastating toll on Tenochtitlan's population, however, was not gunpowder, but disease. The arrival of the Spanish had brought with it the disease of smallpox, hitherto unknown in this part of the South American continent. To this, the Aztecs had no immunity. By the time that the Spanish laid siege to the city, it was reported that thousands had already perished from the disease. Salmonella may well have also taken its toll on the Aztec population. By the summer of 1521, Tenochtitlan and its inhabitants had met their grisly end. The city was razed to the ground. It was eventually to be rebuilt, albeit in the image of a European city, and survives as Mexico City to this day. The fall of Tenochtitlan in the 16th century, however, gave the Spanish control of the Valley of Mexico and beyond. Indeed, many of the former dominions of the Aztec Empire saw little difference in pledging their allegiance to their new overlords in the Spanish. The Aztec Empire had demanded tribute and labour from their subordinates. The Spanish did the same, only omitting the demand for victims for human sacrifice, which had formed part of the Aztec religion. Cortez and his band of conquistadors followed up their conquest of Tenochtitlan with further settlement in Central America. His generals, Pedro de Alvarado and Cristobal de Olid, launched expeditions from Panama southward into Nicaragua. None of these expeditions uncovered wealth comparable to the Valley of Mexico, but each one continued to bring new wealth, resources and local populations into the sphere of Spanish dominance. Spanish conquest of the rest of Mexico was to take far longer than that of the Aztecs and was to be even more brutal. This region, called the Nuevo Vizcaya, was to remain a violent frontier well into the 17th century. Eventually, Franciscan and Jesuit missionaries were to replace the conquistador as the main frontmen of conquest in South America. Each of these was accompanied by a small military garrison that replicated the initial conquest of Cortez. The fall of the Aztecs in 1521, however, was to set the benchmark for the quick and easy wealth that could be obtained by the Spanish in the conquest of the South American continent. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the History Chronicles. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do like, subscribe to us on Patreon if you can, and I look forward to seeing you next time for some more history.